your property and your lifestyle. So we're going to cover 3 elements today. There's lots of ways of creating value around your home, but these 3 elements not only create value for your home, but also for your lifestyle. So we're going to start with honest design, reflecting where you live. Balance between the elements, so that's balance between the hard landscaping and the soft landscaping, and also future-proofing and space planning. So we'll start with honest design, reflecting where you live. So before I start on this, I'll actually get a show of hands. Who is building their home at the moment or having their home designed at the moment to be built? So about half the people. Now keep your hand up if you had your garden designed at the same time as your house being designed. Nobody, okay. And that's not unusual because most people aren't gardeners. They just think about the house. But if I told you that the garden can add up to 15% to the value of your home, to the resale value of your home, whereas a new kitchen will only add about 2% to the value of your home, I do wonder why more people don't have fabulous gardens, because it actually is much better bang for your buck to actually have a beautiful, stunning garden that works with where you are. So now let's get back to this. Why is reflecting where you live important? Who's got an idea? I know Steve down the back there might have an idea. Just to make me even more nervous, there's another designer in the back row. Okay, honest design will never go out of fashion. So if you reflect where you live and who you are as a person, yeah, sure, it might be necessary to tweak the garden over time as your needs change, as your taste changes, but basically the garden will never need to be completely rebuilt. A little bit of a backstory here. Most gardens get rebuilt every 10 years, and so most garden designs are basically designed to fail in 10 years' time because people change their fashion, they change their idea of what makes a garden. But if you don't want to do that, if you want to have a garden that's going to last basically for 30, 40 years, because this is your forever home, you're going to be there for the rest of your lives, then you need to do something different, and that thing is reflecting where you live. So how do we go about that? We look for inspiration. So we begin with looking at where you live in a broad sense. So the city you live in, why do you live there? Why did you move to that city, or have you born in that city? And what do you love about it? Is it the climate? Is it the culture? Is it the architecture? And start building this story of why you live where you live. And then start looking at the street you live in and the community you live in, and why do you love that? Most people, when they're designing their garden, they'll think about their holiday destination. So they'll think about Tuscany or Bali, and they'll want to create a fantasy around that destination. But those things change over time and potentially will go out of fashion. Whereas if you look at where you live, that'll never go out of fashion because you'll always live there. It'll be a part of your life. And then finally, if this works, there we go. What do you love about your actual home? So you look at the big picture and then bring it down to the smaller picture. And so look at the architecture of your actual house. Look at the family you live with and what their needs are and what your needs are. So, just go back one. So basically, if you're designing a garden based on where you live, it will never go out of fashion. So even when you come to sell that property, the new owners will walk in and feel instantly at home. Even if their taste is vastly different to yours, the bones of that garden won't need to be changed because you've thought about how that garden's put together. So they'll walk in and instantly feel at home. They'll walk in and go, wow, I love the house and the garden. But what often happens is people walk in and go, love the house, but gee, that Balinese garden is so last season. And that's a block to selling that house because they don't like the garden. So if you have a garden that actually suits where you live, I'll give you an example. If you live in a bayside suburb, it should be very different to an inner city suburb or a outer suburb. So a bayside suburb, probably you want to use soft textures like sandstone and limestone and plants that naturally grow or at least survive near the bay. And so often those are sort of grey leaf plants because they don't mind salt, or small leaf plants. Whereas if you live in the inner suburbs, you might go for darker grey paving, so you might go for bluestone, and then have lusher greener foliage. So it looks different. So each garden should be site specific. It's also really easy to get caught up in the buzz of beautiful magazines and, oh, I really like that. But just because the magazines might be saying that large-scale paving is the latest thing, doesn't mean it's going to look good in context with your Doncaster blonde brick home. So you have to think about where you live. Okay, balance between elements. Any idea of why this one's important? So that's balance between hard landscaping and soft landscaping. It makes the space more livable and therefore more usable. So if you want to live in that space, then you're going to use it. And a lot of people, we all think about things differently. So some people think of big picture, some people think small detail. And as a designer, it's my job to look at both, the big picture, the small detail, and look at the world at different angles to create the design. Let's play a little game. Which do you prefer? The one on the right or the one on the left? So those who can't quite see it, the one on the left is just a swimming pool with lots of paving around it. The one on the right is a swimming pool with a bit of greenery, a nice seat, that sort of thing. So which do you like? The one on the far side, the right? Okay. That's because there's a balance between the soft landscaping and hard landscaping. Some people would prefer this because they think it's low maintenance. But if you're not going to use this space, any maintenance in that case would be too much maintenance, because if you're actually going to jump in, go for a swim and then go inside, what's the point in having the outdoor space? Whereas this one, you'll go for a swim, sit on the seat, enjoy, but it's the green space that invites you out. It's the green space that makes that possible. Okay, which do you prefer? The one on the right or the one on the left? So someone said left, people are still saying right. And again, to a certain extent, it is up to your own personal, the way you like. I really like plants, so I actually like this one too. But for some people, this one is too many plants. And so, as I said before, we look at things differently. So some people will look at the hard landscaping and do too much of that, and it'll be harsh and uncomfortable. Other people who are very into plants will forget about the hard landscaping and fill the garden with plants. And that's also a mistake, because it means that the garden, for some people, this is too dark and too messy and too, a little bit uncomfortable. And so again, this is well balanced. And then I'll leave you on this one as well. So again, we've got the original one, which sort of most people like, but also this one is well balanced as well. So it's a bit more of a formal garden. But again, it's much more enticing. It's the green spaces that invite you out. So future-proofing and space planning. Why is this one important? Any ideas? It allows the garden to increase in value over time. So gardens are one of those really interesting things that actually physically increase in value. So a small tree might cost you $100 at the nursery. Once that tree grows to maturity, people say that that's worth about $25,000. So it literally increases in value as it ages. But that only works if you've designed the garden well. So if you put a small tree in the wrong spot, or a young tree in the wrong spot, before it reaches maturity, before you get that value from it, you have to chop it down because it's in the wrong spot. So by planning your spaces early on, then you'll get more value out of it, and it will allow it to increase, because the garden will get better over time. Often that doesn't happen. People think about today, and the garden lasts for about 10 years, because in 10 years' time everything's overgrown or just not in the right spot. So you need to think about the long term. So you need to ask yourself a few questions. So you might have young children at the moment, and so they need a bit of lawn and a trampoline. But what happens when they become moody teenagers? What happens when they become adults? How are you going to share that space with your adult children that just don't seem to want to leave home? And when you're finally empty nesters, how are you going to use that space? do you need a trampoline when you're in your 90s? So asking these questions, asking yourself how long you're going to live in the house and will your circumstances change during that time, will give you the opportunity to think about how you place items in the landscape. So those structural things that you don't want to change, where the barbecue area is, where the paving is, where the swimming pool is, those things have to be thought about, but also then, is it possible to convert that trampoline area into a courtyard when the child's grown up? Another way to look at future-proofing and space planning is dead space. There's a lot of dead space in people's gardens because they think, okay, we want a swimming pool, but they can't think about all the other things that they need, so they do nothing. So you have a swimming pool surrounded by space that just isn't usable. So give everything a use, and also think about ways of integrating those spaces with each other, but also with the home. And this also goes back to honesty in design, but honesty in materials. So honest materials are what they are. They're not trying to be something else. So often you see concrete that's trying to be clay paving. Just use clay paving. You see concrete trying to be stone. Just use stone. Stone will last much longer than something that's made to look like stone. The reason why is because the veneer of stone look will wear off fairly quickly, and then you'll have this weird, mottly, concrete, stony sort of look. And so it will age dreadfully. But honest materials, and look, some of these, for example, I do have concrete written down here, but some people, and probably Steve, probably thinks that concrete's not particularly environmentally friendly, and possibly it isn't. However, as a product that looks like concrete, so it might be honed, it might be, which is grinding it back, it might be exposed aggregate, that will always look like that. It will always look honed, it will always look exposed aggregate, it will last 50 years or more, and it's a long-lasting hard-wearing product. There's nothing wrong with just beautiful concrete until you turn it into something it's not. So until you put a pattern on it, or paint it, or all of those sorts of things. So avoid things like fake grass, pressed or patterned concrete, and some painted finishes. Now, a lot of people in the room probably think, well, what's wrong with fake grass? Well, fake grass, to me as a designer, means that you've given up on the design process. It means that it's always an alternative if you think about it long enough and hard enough. And so fake grass is for those people who don't have an imagination to think of something else. Now, the reason why I don't like fake grass is because, A, why would you want to have plastic in your backyard? It just doesn't make sense. Secondly, natural plants which have access to natural soil have a balance of good bacteria and bad bacteria. The good bacteria eats the bad bacteria, neutralizes the bad bacteria. Fake grass doesn't have the good bacteria. So if you skin your knee on fake grass, you'll get an infection. Also, it still grows weeds, it still needs to be blown, it still needs to be raked. It's not low maintenance. Okay, so get that out of your head. Fake grass is not low maintenance. Also only looks good for about 5 years and it starts to press down and get weedy and look dreadful. So, and then when you get sick of it, it sits in landfill for another 1,000 years. So just, yeah, you might have worked out that I don't really like fake grass. So this is an example of a garden that I started designing at the start of the year, and it's pretty typical of a lot of the projects that come my way. So if I come down here, this grey area is the existing house, the white area is the extension, the blue area is what the client has asked for, and the architect, not the landscape designer, but the architect has thought, okay, well, I'll put those on the plan, and the green space here is what I'm left with. Now, to me, that green space is actually dead space. There's nothing to invite you in there. And almost, it doesn't matter what I do, people aren't going to use it. And you might say, well, children will use it because it's lawn, they'll go and kick a ball on it. Well, again, it goes back to one day those children won't want to kick a ball, so it's still going to be dead space. But also, we know that children like to play in close proximity to trusted adults. So if there's nothing down here for the trusted adults, there's nothing down there for the children. Also, this area here, it's all crammed up. There's no green space around it. So this is a fire pit. Why would you sit there? It's in a thoroughfare. It's very uncomfortable. You'd be sitting there looking at a brick wall or sitting there looking at a paling fence. This is a swimming pool. It's in a pig pen. You jump in, go for a swim, go back inside. There's nothing to keep you outside. And then this is a barbecue area. The poor person barbecuing isn't engaged at all with the people he's barbecuing for. He's just looking at a paling fence. So my solution to this, if it comes up, hopefully you can see this. It sort of looks better on my small screen. But basically by moving some of the activity to that dead space, it draws people out into the garden. I've also put the fire pit area next to the swimming pool because fire pit areas will be used for longer. They get used from sort of spring all the way through to the end of autumn. Swimming pools in Melbourne, maybe a month or two in the middle of the summer. So that means this area gets more use. I've also put a large area of green in the middle, so then all areas of the garden have access to green space, so it makes them feel welcoming. I've also made the deck area smaller, so I can now put planting here, so the person barbecuing here can face the people he's barbecuing for, and he's also surrounded by green space, which draws you out there. This area here is a little bit interesting. At the moment, these two bedrooms here have young children in them, so this is where the trampoline's going to go for maybe the next 5 years. But as these become older teenagers and perhaps adults, this area will become their own private courtyard. And you can also, and that's why there's doors here and here, so they can walk straight out into that space. And perhaps it might be an area for your, if you're not using it for your adult children, it might be an area for your grandparents to live when they need somewhere to live, or it might be somewhere for your visitors to live. You might turn it into an Airbnb. But it's nice to create those little courtyards that lead straight into the home. So, just to very quickly recap, how am I going for time? Good? Honest design, reflect where you live. Use honest materials, honest plants that connect with the architecture of your home. Design the garden to reflect what you love about where you live. Now this is important. Most people design the garden based on what they hate. They hate seeing the neighbours, they hate this, they hate that. So they end up creating just a garden full of things to block out the rest of the world. Turn that on its head. Design the garden around things that you love about where you live, not about the things that you hate. Balance between elements. Only pave what is necessary to be comfortable and use green space everywhere else. Create green spaces between the activity spaces. Those green spaces will draw you out and make you use those activity spaces more. Use natural shade from trees. I didn't really mention this before, but it is an important one. A tree will shade and cool the house, particularly if it's on the west or northern side of the house, by about 5 degrees. So the inside of the house will be 5 degrees cooler. But you need to allow room for those trees. So those of you who are planning your house, that might mean shaving a little bit off your house or moving your house slightly to allow for those trees in the right spot. So that's why it's important to think about designing your garden at the same time as your house, because you may actually decide, well, that's facing west, we need trees. Oh, we don't have room for trees, so we need to move the house. That sounds shocking to some people. Why would you move the house for a garden? But it makes so much sense to someone like me. Future-proofing. Carefully plan each space. Give each space use and avoid dead space, and plan for the change in use over time. Any questions?
Don't be shy, guys.
I'll answer one that came up yesterday, and then that might warm you up and you can ask a few more questions. Also, I've just been reminded that people viewing me on Facebook can also ask questions, and I'll answer them after the show. Are there questions on there?
Someone called Bronwyn who's tagged her friend Natalie, so you can just say hi, Bronwyn.
Hi, Bronwyn.
Yeah.
That's okay. Look, one of the things is I've just mentioned that from my talk, you could almost assume that I'm saying to avoid themed gardens like Balinese or Tuscan or that sort of thing. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. As a designer, I try to avoid those things because I feel that they will date really horribly. However, if you love Balinese style or Tuscan style or some other style, you can use it as sort of a layer over the top of the good design. So you still use plants that grow in your area, you still use materials that make sense with your area, but then you might choose plants. If you've got a Balinese garden, you might choose a bamboo or something that also happens to grow in your area but looks more Balinese. Or you might bring in some pots, or you might decide to use a gravel as a pavement so it looks more Tuscan. So you can bring in those other styles, but only after you've thought about everything else. Are there any other questions?
Anyone? Yep.
Yep. Oh, sorry. We'll get to you in a second.
What favourite tree to plant in the suburban centre?
Because I feel that we're losing trees, I try my hardest to plant big trees whenever I can, which is not often because our gardens are getting a bit too small for big trees. So my favourite big tree is a ginkgo biloba, maidenhair tree. I also quite like, you can't go past a really lovely lemon-scented gum tree. Those sorts of things are lovely, but they're often too big for most people's gardens. So a really good tree that's around these days are things like crepe myrtles. Good small to medium-sized trees, works well in most gardens. You can uplift the crown so you can walk underneath them. They're not too small, not too big, and they're really, really hardy. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, there's a question here.
Yeah. What plants are good by the beach?
Look, there's a couple of ways of doing it. You can either go to your local native plant nursery, because there's lots of natives that are coastal plants. But if you're not into natives, then try Mediterranean plants, because a lot of things like rosemary and thyme and those sort of things naturally grow on the cliff faces in the Mediterranean, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. So think about where these plants naturally grow and choose those. But as a general rule, things that grow by the beach or grow by the bay tend to be either grassy or have very small leaves and tend to have grey tones to the leaves. And those are modifications that the plant has created over time to survive those locations, and they also tend to be quite leathery leaves as well. So you can sort of tell, you can look at a plant and go, well, that looks coastal. But it's very difficult because there's so much to choose from. But just do your research. Go to the nursery, have a little look. You don't necessarily need to have natives.
Anybody else got time for one more question? Yep.
I agree with you what you're talking about trees, but I just wonder about the root system on a lot of these trees and the damage that may come about because of it.
Yeah, so look, it comes down to a few things. It comes down to speaking to your architect and letting them know that that's what you're wanting to do. Also comes down to making sure there's enough room for trees. So making sure you can plant the trees maybe 8 or 10 metres away from the house. Smaller trees, not as big a problem. So the things like the crepe myrtle aren't going to be too much of a problem. Things like olive trees probably aren't going to be too much of a problem. But you also don't want them pushed right up. I often see magnolia little gems, because they've got the word little in their name, people plant them right up against their houses. Not a good idea. They're actually quite a reasonable sized tree. So ignore the word little. They're pretty big trees. So yes, you don't want to cram any tree up against the house. But that's why it comes down, those people who are designing their homes at the moment, that's why right at the start, I often say the best time to engage a landscape designer is before your house plans go through council, which is what that person did. That's why I could change it around. The second best time is any time after that. But that way you can design your house to allow for trees. And it's going to be increasingly important because trees will add so much value to your property. And if you don't allow room for trees, then you're missing out on 5, 10, 15, maybe even 25% of the value of your property because you can't put trees in because the space is too small. Any other questions?
No, I think we're all good. I think we've answered all of them. But Stephen's also going to be sticking around over, and we've got these 2 little egg chairs over in the corner. He's going to be hanging out.
Oh, is that where I go?
Yeah,
I didn't realise that. Okay, that's where I go. Okay.
So if you have any questions and want to get a card and say hello, I'm sure Stephen's welcome to stay around. Please, round of applause, Mr. Stephen Reid. Very helpful, very informative. And guys online on YouTube, Facebook, if you have questions, type them and we'll get back to you as well. Hope you guys have had a good morning so far. We have another speaker coming up in about 5-10 minutes time. Michael Cook from Andertech is going to be talking about indoor air quality. So all the problems you might come up against and then a lot of solutions. So that's in 10 minutes time right here.